Since antiquity, interpreters have played an important role making communication possible among people who otherwise would be unable to understand each other. Interpreters often appear throughout the course of history. They were present in ancient Egypt, where they served the pharaohs, during ancient Rome, where they were called in to interpret during meetings held at the Senate between the Romans and the Greeks, but also during the 649 Lateran Council held under Pope Martin I. Even historic figures such as Cortés and Columbus relied on interpreters in order to communicate with indigenous people. In the past, however, interpreting was considered as a natural ability that some individuals had to translate from one language into another, and wasn't recognized as a profession until the 20th century. The origins of modern interpretation dates back to the 1919 year in which the Paris Peace Conference was held, and being an international conference, interpreters were required. However, they decided to avoid the traditional sentence-by-sentence translation and opted for a new and revolutionary interpreting technique, known today as consecutive interpreting. Thanks to a particular note-taking method that consisted in writing symbols and abbreviations on paper, the interpreter was able to translate long speech segments lasting up to 1 hour, while nowadays the speaker pauses after 15 minutes. The first manuals dedicated to this activity appeared for the first time in the 50s, and Jean-François Rozin, in his work called La prise de notes en interprétation consécutive, proposed some symbols that are still used today by interpreters. As note-taking is a very personal matter, there is no specific model to be followed, although 4 criteria should always be respected: clearness, non-ambiguity, simplicity, and economy. In the 1920s, thanks to the invention of a new device made of microphones and earphones, a new interpreting mode called simultaneous interpreting was introduced, and it became common practice during the Nuremberg trials. Contrarily to consecutive interpreting, where the interpreter translates only when the speaker pauses, in simultaneous interpreting, the interpreter translates while the speaker is still speaking. Simultaneous interpreting is made of 4 phases: reception, decoding, redecoding, and production of the message. This last phase is very delicate, as the interpreter not only has to pay great attention to the message he/she is delivering, but also has to keep listening to what is being said. As interpreting is not a word-for-word translation, the interpreter tends to disengage from the source language text, and a study conducted by Henry C. Barrick demonstrates that the interpreter does so in 3 different ways: by omitting part of the source language, by adding new elements to the text, or by substituting some information which could lead to serious errors in translation. A curious case on how stressful this job can be was reported through an article by the New York Post, where the interpreter of Libyan leader Gaddafi yelled, "I can't take it anymore," after translating a contorted speech at the UN that lasted over 75 minutes. Apart from working for the UN, many consecutive and simultaneous interpreters work for the European institutions. Lately, an awareness campaign has been launched in Italy in order to attract young people to pursue an interpreting career, as it is believed that 40% of current Italian interpreters may retire in the next 10 years. In conference interpreting, the communication is monologic and unidirectional, while in liaison interpreting, it is dialogic and bidirectional. If it was once believed that the liaison interpreter should only translate from one language into another, being as invisible and neutral as possible, recent studies have demonstrated that this conception is changing. In fact, many experts believe that the interpreter should not only translate, but also handle the dialogue, clarify misunderstandings, and provide explanations and information. When it comes to business deals, the liaison interpreter's job is not always an easy task, and at times they have to face complicated situations, such as when a negotiator who doesn't want to close a deal pretends not to understand what is being said and lays the blame on the interpreter. In some occasions, negotiators feel reluctant in appointing an interpreter, and according to a recent study, this is due to two reasons. Not only do they see the interpreter as an intruder, but also as a non-specialist with little understanding of corporate culture. It is vital to underline that due to the poor opinion which many negotiators have of interpreters and the little consideration that is given to linguistic mediation, many international negotiations are unsuccessful. Moreover, it has been proven that negotiators who express themselves in their mother tongue have an upper hand in business deals, whereas the other part, who uses a language that is not his or her own, is clearly at a disadvantage. By appointing an interpreter, the situation would be avoided. Two new professions have recently emerged in Italy, namely the court interpreter and the medical interpreter. At the moment, court interpreters are in great demand in Italy due to the significant increase in foreign people involved in legal lawsuits, during which, in compliance with Article 109.1 of the Penal Procedure Code, it is obligatory to use Italian language. The court interpreter's job is mainly regulated by the articles ranging from 143 to 147 of the Penal Procedure Code, although they are not always clear and might lead to confusion. For instance, no distinction is made between the profession of the interpreter and that of the translator, even though their tasks are very different. Moreover, they do not specify the criteria by which interpreters are selected. As there is no professional association nor register for interpreters, many of them sign up by the court's register, known as the Albo dei Periti. However, interpreters can be appointed even if they don't belong to any of these registers. Therefore, most of the times, the selection of court interpreters is carried out in a superficial way, and more often we hear of errors of justice caused by bad interpreting. A scandalous case is that of actor Yasmin, a Bengal woman who spent 2 years in jail because of an incorrect translation made by her interpreter. As far as wages are concerned, court interpreters in Italy are the most underpaid in all of Europe, and at times they earn as little as €4 per hour pre-tax, and with months of delay. This situation caused many interpreters to protest, abandon this profession, and be substituted by unqualified people. Consecutive and liaison interpreting are the most common modes of interpreting during trials, as it is very rare to find courtrooms in Italy that are equipped for simultaneous interpreting. Moving on to the medical field, the profile of the interpreter is more and more often confused with another recent profile, that of the cultural mediator. Although their aim is the same, that is, making it possible for doctors and patients to communicate, their roles are different. The cultural mediator, apart from translating from one language to another, is a support for the patient, with whom he or she establishes a stronger relationship, as they often belong to the same culture. The interpreter, on the other hand, has a more detached behavior, as he or she does not get to the heart of the matter and never adds things to the conversation, unless a doctor specifically asks him or her to do so. Moreover, the interpreter translates in a more precise way, knows perfectly the medical terminology as well as interpreting techniques. According to Maide Martin and Mary Fallon, the perfect solution would be that of calling in cultural mediators first, so that they would help patients and doctors overcome cultural barriers and would help them relate to one another. When this occurs, the cultural mediator should be substituted by the medical interpreter, who will provide a satisfying and accurate translation. At national level, the Infermi Hospital in Rimini provides one of the best medical interpreter services, and like in many other hospitals, its medical interpreters are part of the permanent staff. Moreover, in these last few years, a new telephone interpreting service called SOS Infomondo has been introduced in many hospital settings, permitting a significant reduction in cost and time. Interpreting has been fully recognized as a profession only a century ago. Therefore, the role of the interpreter is still in constant evolution and is not always well defined. Therefore, establishing a professional association for interpreters would be a major step towards regulating this profession.